It was supposed to be an easy night. A warm, polished live TV appearance meant to celebrate music, laughter, and another successful chapter in their careers. Taehyung and Jungkook sat side by side on the cream-colored sofa, relaxed but attentive, dressed in coordinated tones that reflected effortless chemistry rather than intention. The studio lighting was soft, golden, designed to feel intimate without crossing into seriousness. For the first half of the broadcast, everything flowed exactly as planned. They joked about studio mishaps, shared light anecdotes about late-night rehearsals, and smiled comfortably at the host's playful prompts. The audience laughed easily. Cameras moved smoothly, capturing familiar expressions fans had seen countless times before. It felt safe, controlled, predictable. Then the host tilted her cue card slightly and smiled in a way that lingered just a second too long. "There's been a lot of conversation online recently," she began casually, her tone friendly but deliberate, "especially after those photos from last week." The studio screens behind them flickered to life. A blurred nighttime image appeared. Two figures walking closely, one hand resting briefly at the small of the other's back. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't explicit, but it was unmistakably personal. The host continued almost gently. "People noticed a ring too, so I have to ask, is there any truth to the wedding rumors?" The room didn't erupt, it didn't gasp. It went silent. Not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that presses against your ears. The kind that arrives all at once and refuses to leave. Taehyung's hand, which had been mid-gesture, froze in place. His fingers curled slowly as if grounding himself. Jungkook blinked once, then again, his jaw tightening just enough for the cameras to catch it. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The audience held its breath. The cameras zoomed closer, capturing micro-expressions most people would miss if they weren't looking for them. Surprise, calculation, a flicker of something unguarded. The easy warmth that had filled the set moments earlier thinned into tension, delicate and unmistakable. Taehyung lowered his hand to his lap, shoulders settling as he exhaled quietly. Jungkook shifted beside him, posture straightening, instinctively attentive. They didn't look at each other right away. Not yet. "That's," Taehyung began, then paused. His lips curved into a careful smile, the kind that tries to soften what it can't erase. "That's not something we came here to talk about." A murmur rippled through the audience, subdued but present. Jungkook cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, quieter than before. "Some things are better kept personal," he said, "especially when they're still being understood." The host nodded quickly, lifting her hand slightly. "Of course, I didn't mean to put you on the spot," she said, though the moment had already done what it did. "Fans are just curious." Curious was a gentle word for it. The screen shifted again, briefly replaying the image of the ring glinting under a streetlight. A simple silver band, nothing extravagant, but enough to spark weeks of speculation. Taehyung glanced down at his hands. The ring was there. The studio lights caught it instantly. He noticed the reaction before he felt it, the subtle shift in the room, the quiet intake of breath from the front row. Jungkook's gaze followed, landing on the ring, then lifting slowly back to Taehyung's face. For a second, neither of them spoke. Then Taehyung did something no one expected. He gently slid the ring off his finger and placed it on the low table between them. The movement was unhurried, deliberate, almost reverent. "It's not what people think," he said, voice steady but unguarded. "We were just having dinner." The host leaned forward slightly, "But the ring?" Jungkook turned toward Taehyung then, not with frustration or defensiveness, but with something quieter. Concern, understanding, a silent question that didn't need words. "We're still figuring things out," Taehyung continued. "Not everything needs a label right away." The vulnerability in his tone shifted the room again. This time the silence felt different, softer, heavier. Jungkook spoke next, subtly angling his body closer. "We've both been through a lot," he said. "Individually and together, there are parts of that journey we don't share publicly. But," he added after a brief pause, "we respect each other deeply." The host nodded, expression gentler now. "That's more than fair." From the audience a single clap started. Then another, not loud, not overwhelming, just supportive, understanding. As the applause faded, something fragile settled into place. The question hadn't been answered the way people wanted, but it hadn't been dismissed either. As the show transitioned toward the next segment, laughter slowly returned, though it carried a different tone now. Lighter on the surface, heavier underneath. And even as the cameras pulled back and the lights warmed again, the question lingered in the air, unresolved, quietly powerful. Had they avoided it? The moment the cameras stopped rolling, the atmosphere shifted again. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough to be felt. The studio lights dimmed slightly as technicians moved with quiet efficiency, resetting the space for the next segment. The audience was still murmuring, their reactions restrained but buzzing beneath the surface. Everyone knew they had just witnessed something unscripted, something that hadn't been planned for ratings or rehearsed in advance. Taehyung remained seated for a beat longer than necessary, his gaze unfocused, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. Jungkook leaned closer, his voice low enough to stay between them. "You okay?" he asked, not as a performer, but as someone checking in. Taehyung nodded once. "Yeah," he said, though the word carried more effort than certainty. A stage assistant gestured subtly, signaling it was time to move backstage. They stood together, their steps unhurried, aware that even now cameras might catch something unintended. They didn't touch. They didn't need to. The distance between them felt intentional, careful, but not cold. Backstage, the noise returned all at once. Staff members whispered updates. Phones buzzed nonstop. Screens already displayed live comments flooding in faster than anyone could read them. Words like awkward, brave, unexpected, and protect them repeated over and over in different languages. Their manager approached, expression controlled but alert. "That escalated faster than we expected," he said quietly, "but you handled it well." Jungkook gave a small nod. Taehyung exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Did we?" he asked, not defensively, just honestly. The manager hesitated. "You didn't confirm anything," he said carefully, "but you didn't deny it either." "That was kind of the point," Taehyung replied. For a moment no one spoke. The silence here was different from the one on set, less public, more real. They were ushered into a private dressing room, the door closing softly behind them. The space was quiet, insulated from the chaos outside. A single mirror reflected two versions of them, still in stage-ready outfits, still carrying the weight of the moment. Taehyung sat down first, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "I didn't plan to take the ring off," he said after a moment. "It just felt wrong to keep pretending it meant nothing." Jungkook watched him closely. "I noticed," he said, "but I didn't think it was a mistake." Taehyung looked up surprised. "You did?" "No," Jungkook replied. "I think people felt the honesty, even if they didn't understand it." Taehyung leaned back, eyes drifting to the ceiling. "That's what scares me," he said quietly. "When they feel it, they want to own it." Jungkook didn't argue. He understood that fear too well. Outside the room, the show wrapped up smoothly. Laughter returned on cue. A lighter segment played out. But inside, the earlier question continued to echo, reshaping the air between them. By the time they left the studio, the night had fully settled in. The city lights blurred past the van windows as they headed back. Neither of them checked their phones at first. They sat in silence, the hum of the engine filling the gaps. Eventually, Taehyung broke it. "Do you think we crossed a line?" Jungkook considered the question carefully. "I think we stood on one," he said. "That's different." Taehyung nodded slowly. "I don't regret it," he admitted, but I didn't expect it to feel this heavy. Jungkook turned slightly toward him. It doesn't have to be heavy forever. Taehyung gave a faint smile. I know, I just need time to breathe before the world decides what it thinks it saw. By the time they arrived back at their building, their phones could no longer be ignored. Notifications stacked endlessly, trending alerts, messages from friends, clips already circulating, slowed down, zoomed in, dissected frame by frame. Taehyung scrolled once, then stopped. They're already writing the story, he said. Jungkook glanced at the screen, then looked away. They always do. But this time, Taehyung added, it feels closer. They rode the elevator up in silence. When the doors opened, the familiar hallway greeted them, calm and unchanged, as if the world outside hadn't just shifted slightly off its axis. Inside their shared space, Taehyung kicked off his shoes and sat down heavily on the couch. Jungkook followed, placing 2 bottles of water on the table. Neither of them reached for one right away. I don't want this to turn into something we lose control of, Taehyung said finally. Jungkook nodded. Then we don't let it, he replied. We move slower, quieter on our terms. Taehyung looked at him, searching. You're really okay with that? Jungkook met his gaze without hesitation. I've always been okay with protecting what matters, he said, even if it means not explaining it. The tension in Taehyung's shoulders eased slightly. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Tonight wasn't supposed to matter this much. But it did, Jungkook said gently, and we're still here. Outside, the city continued its restless movement. Online, debates grew louder. Headlines formed and reformed. But inside the quiet of the room, something steadier took shape. Not answers, not clarity. Just resolve. Whatever came next, it wouldn't be decided by a single question asked under studio lights. And the story, despite what everyone thought, was far from over. By morning, the silence they had chosen was no longer theirs alone. Taehyung woke to the soft vibration of his phone buried beneath a pillow. He didn't need to check the screen to know what it was. The energy in the room already felt different, charged in a way that made stillness impossible. When he finally reached for the phone, the notifications stacked endlessly, blurring into one another. Headlines, clips, reactions, analysis videos already climbing into the millions of views. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, and scrolled just once. Did you see this? They didn't deny it. Protect them. This feels too real. Taehyung locked the screen and exhaled. Across the room, Jungkook was already awake, leaning against the window with a cup of coffee, staring out at the city like he was measuring distance. It's everywhere, Taehyung said quietly. Jungkook nodded without turning. I figured it would be. The morning light spilled in softly, catching dust in the air, making everything feel suspended. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was nothing left to clarify between them. The noise was outside now. Later that day, they were called into a meeting. Not urgent, but not optional either. The room was familiar, clean, neutral, designed to feel calm even when the conversations inside it were. Their manager sat across from them, tablet in hand, expression carefully unreadable. The response is massive, he began. Engagement is through the roof. International press picked it up overnight. Taehyung leaned back slightly, and the network wants a follow-up, the manager continued. A clarification segment, prime time. They're framing it as giving you space to explain things in your own words. Jungkook's jaw tightened. Explain what? That's the problem, the manager admitted. They don't know either. They just know people are watching. Taehyung glanced at Jungkook, then back. We're not doing that. The answer came too quickly to be rehearsed. It surprised even him. The manager studied them for a moment. I thought you might say that, he said, but I need to be clear. The longer this stays ambiguous, the louder the speculation gets. Jungkook spoke calmly. Ambiguity isn't always dishonesty. The manager didn't disagree. "No," he said, "but it makes people uncomfortable." "Then maybe they need to sit with that," Taehyung replied. When the meeting ended, nothing was decided but the wait lingered. Outside, schedules continued. Rehearsals resumed. Interviews unrelated to the incident moved forward as if nothing had happened. But everything felt slightly misaligned, like a familiar song played in the wrong key. That evening they rehearsed together for the first time since the broadcast. The studio was dim, lit only by overhead panels and the glow of equipment. Music filled the space, but something was off. The timing lagged. The harmony didn't settle. They stopped halfway through. "Again?" Jungkook asked. Taehyung shook his head. "Not yet." He sat down on the edge of the stage, elbows resting on his knees. "Do you ever feel like we're performing around something instead of through it?" Jungkook set his mic down carefully. "Lately, yeah." Taehyung stared at the floor. "I don't want to turn everything we are into subtext," he said, "but I also don't want to turn it into content." Jungkook joined him, sitting close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "We don't have to choose either extreme," he said. "We just have to stop letting other people choose for us." Taehyung let out a quiet laugh. "That sounds easier than it is." "I know," Jungkook replied, "but it's still true." Later that night, after the studio emptied and the city quieted, Taehyung found himself scrolling again despite promising he wouldn't. Fan edits, thoughtful essays, arguments unfolding in comment sections he didn't recognize. Some people wanted answers, others wanted protection, everyone wanted certainty. He shut the phone off and set it aside. Jungkook noticed, "Too much." "Too much," Taehyung agreed. "I keep thinking, what if silence isn't enough anymore?" Jungkook considered that. "Then maybe we find a different way to speak," he said. "Like what?" "Not interviews," Jungkook replied. "Not statements, something that's ours." Taehyung looked at him, interest flickering. "You mean music?" Jungkook nodded. "It's the only place we've ever been honest without explaining ourselves." The idea settled between them, quiet but solid. They didn't rush it. Over the next few days they kept their distance from the noise. No posts, no reactions, just work quietly redirected, late nights in the studio, half-finished melodies, lyrics scribbled and crossed out. One evening, Taehyung sat at the piano, fingers resting on the keys without pressing them. "What if this just makes things louder?" he asked. Jungkook adjusted his guitar strap. "Then at least it'll be louder in our voice." They started slow, no grand concept, no intention to answer anything, just sound, feeling, the kind that doesn't translate well into headlines. As the first chorus took shape, something eased. Not resolved, not fixed, but steadied. Outside, the world kept guessing. Inside, they were finally listening to themselves. And whatever came next would come from there. The song came together quietly without announcement or expectation. There was no deadline attached to it, no pressure from outside voices. It grew in the late hours, shaped by pauses more than sound. Taehyung would hum a line and stop, listening to the silence that followed. Jungkook would adjust a chord, then let it linger unfinished. Nothing about it felt performative. It felt private, almost protective. When they finally listened back to the rough recording, neither of them spoke right away. The studio lights were dim, casting long shadows across the floor. The melody wasn't dramatic. It didn't beg to be understood. It simply existed. "That feels honest," Taehyung said at last. Jungkook nodded, "which means it's going to be misunderstood." They shared a brief smile, the kind that acknowledged a truth without resenting it. The decision to release it wasn't immediate. They debated quietly, weighing intention against consequence. In the end, it wasn't framed as a response or a clarification or a message. It was uploaded without captions, without explanation. Just a simple studio video. 2 silhouettes backlit, no close-ups, no editing tricks. Within an hour, It reached numbers most releases took days to reach. By the end of the night, it was everywhere. Reactions split almost instantly. Some fans called it beautiful, brave, deeply human. Others accused them of fueling speculation, of saying everything without saying anything at all. Media outlets struggled to categorize it. Was it art? A statement? Damage control? It was none of those, and that was exactly the problem. The next morning, Taehyung scrolled through the responses with a distant expression. "They're asking if this confirms something," he said. Jungkook glanced over. "Does it?" Taehyung thought about it. "I think it confirms that we're tired of pretending. We don't feel anything." "That's not the same thing," Jungkook said gently. "I know," Taehyung replied, "but the internet doesn't." Later that day, they were called in again. This time, the meeting room felt heavier, not tense but cautious. Their manager sat with another staff member from the international division. The tone was polite, professional, carefully distant. "The song is trending globally," the executive said. "That's the good news." Taehyung waited. "There's concern from partners," the executive continued. "They're unsure how to position future campaigns with this level of emotional ambiguity." Jungkook's gaze sharpened. Emotional ambiguity. "Yes," the executive said. "Some brands prefer clarity." Taehyung leaned forward slightly. "Clarity about what?" The executive hesitated. "About how you present yourselves." Silence settled into the room. "So you want us to be quieter," Jungkook said. "We want stability," the executive replied. "Predictability." Taehyung let out a slow breath. "That's not what we are right now." The meeting ended without resolution. No threats, no ultimatums, just implications hanging in the air, unspoken but understood. That evening they walked together without destination, letting the city blur around them. The noise felt distant here, anonymous, manageable. "I hate that this turns into business so fast," Taehyung said. Jungkook nodded. "It always does." "Do you ever wish we could just exist without explaining ourselves?" "All the time," Jungkook replied, "but then we wouldn't be us." They stopped near a quiet intersection, traffic humming softly. Taehyung looked at him. "Are you okay with all of this?" Jungkook didn't answer right away. "I'm okay with us," he said finally. "The rest I can handle." That answer lingered. Over the next few days, the pressure didn't fade. Interview requests multiplied. Articles speculated endlessly. Every gesture from old footage resurfaced with new meaning attached. The song continued to climb, not because it answered anything, but because it refused to. One night, as they prepared for rehearsal, Taehyung paused at the doorway. "What if this changes how people see us forever?" Jungkook adjusted his in-ear monitors. "People were always going to change how they see us," he said. "We just didn't usually get a say in it." Taehyung smiled faintly. "And now?" "Now we're at least part of the conversation." The rehearsal that night was quieter, less polished, more intentional. They moved carefully, listening to each other more than the track. When it ended, neither rushed to leave. "I don't want this to become a breaking point," Taehyung said softly. Jungkook met his gaze. "Then it won't be," he replied. "Breaking points only happen when people stop talking." Taehyung nodded. "Promise we won't." "I promise," Jungkook said without hesitation. Outside, the city kept watching. The industry kept calculating. Fans kept debating. But inside the quiet space they'd carved out, something steadier held. Not certainty, not answers. Just choice. And for now, that was enough. The consequences arrived quietly, the way they always did. Not as headlines or statements, but as subtle shifts in routine. A meeting rescheduled without explanation. A brand collaboration paused pending internal review. A segment removed from a variety show lineup with no follow-up call. Nothing was taken away outright. Everything was simply placed on hold. Taehyung noticed it first in the empty spaces of his schedule. Time that used to be filled with appearances and rehearsals now stretched open, unfamiliar and strangely heavy. He spent more hours in the studio, not recording, just listening. Old demos, instrumentals that never made it past the first draft, songs that existed before everything became measured. Jungkook noticed it in the questions people stopped asking, the friendly check-ins that became formal, the casual jokes that disappeared. Conversations felt careful now, as if everyone was afraid of stepping into something undefined. One afternoon, they sat across from each other in a quiet conference room. No managers this time, no staff, just the two of them and a window overlooking the city. "We need to decide how we move forward," Taehyung said. Jungkook nodded, "I know." Silence followed, not uncomfortable but serious. "They're not asking us to deny anything," Taehyung continued. "They're asking us to redirect attention, solo focus, separate schedules, less overlap." Jungkook's expression didn't change. "That's not new." "No," Taehyung agreed, "but this time it feels permanent." Jungkook leaned back in his chair. "Do you think separating would make things quieter?" "For a while," Taehyung said honestly, "until something else fills the gap." "And would it make things easier for you?" Taehyung hesitated. "Easier isn't the right word." Jungkook watched him carefully. "Say it anyway." "It would make things simpler," Taehyung said. "Not better, just simpler." Jungkook exhaled slowly. "I don't want simple if it means pretending again." That was the center of it. Not rumors, not pressure, not the industry. Pretending had always been the most exhausting part. They didn't decide anything that day. Big decisions, they'd learned, rarely survived being rushed. Instead, they agreed on smaller truths. That they wouldn't release statements written by someone else. That they wouldn't use silence as punishment. That whatever choices came next would be mutual. The next week brought a live performance. Not a major broadcast, not a comeback stage, just a scheduled appearance that had been planned long before everything shifted. There was no avoiding it, no hiding behind edits or pre-recorded segments. Backstage, the air felt different, tighter, focused. Taehyung adjusted his mic, grounding himself in familiar motions. Jungkook stretched nearby, eyes closed, breathing steady. "You okay?" Taehyung asked. Jungkook opened his eyes. "Yeah, you." "Yeah," Taehyung replied, and this time he meant it. When they stepped on stage, the crowd reacted instantly. Not louder than usual, not quieter either, just attentive in a way that felt charged. Every movement mattered more now. Every glance seemed to carry weight. They performed without deviation. No added gestures, no emphasis. Just the song delivered cleanly, professionally, but something subtle shifted midway through. A shared breath before the chorus. A harmony held half a second longer than rehearsed. The audience felt it. Not as confirmation, not as spectacle, as connection. When the final note faded, the applause was steady and full. No screaming questions, no awkward silence, just appreciation. Backstage afterward, neither of them spoke right away. Taehyung sat down, hands resting on his knees, heart still racing. "That felt right," he said. Jungkook smiled faintly. "Yeah, it did." Later that night, the performance clips began circulating. Not dissected the way the broadcast interview had been, not framed as evidence. People talked about the vocals, the emotion, the restraint. For the first time in weeks, the narrative loosened its grip. A few days later, their manager called them in. This meeting felt different, less guarded, more honest. "There's been a shift," he said. Public response to the performance was overwhelmingly positive. Partners are easing up, not because they understand everything, but because they see stability. Taehyung tilted his head. "Stability." "You didn't escalate," the manager explained. "You didn't retreat either. You stayed consistent." Jungkook exchanged a glance with Taehyung. "So what happens now?" The manager smiled slightly. Now you keep doing what you've been doing, carefully, intentionally. After the meeting, they walked out into the evening air together. The city lights felt less overwhelming than before. We didn't fix anything, Taehyung said. Jungkook shrugged. We didn't break anything either. They stopped at a crosswalk, waiting for the light to change. Do you regret answering that question the way you did? Jungkook asked. Taehyung thought back to the studio lights, the ring, the silence that followed. No, he said. I regret how afraid I was of it. Jungkook nodded. Me too. The light changed. They crossed without hurry. Nothing had been resolved publicly. No labels applied. No explanations given. But something important had shifted beneath the surface. They had chosen how to stand in the uncertainty instead of running from it. And sometimes that was the most honest answer of all. Time did what no statement ever could. It softened the sharp edges without erasing what had happened. Weeks passed, then months. The intensity around that single live TV moment slowly faded into the background noise of new releases, new headlines, new distractions. But it never disappeared completely. It settled into something quieter, something that followed them without demanding attention. Taehyung noticed it during a solo schedule overseas. In hotel rooms that felt too quiet, he replayed moments not with regret but with clarity. The question, the ring, the pause that had felt endless at the time. He realized the silence hadn't been empty. It had been honest. On the other side of the world, Jungkook felt it too. During late-night practices, he caught himself smiling at memories that used to make him tense. The fear had changed shape. It wasn't gone, but it no longer controlled the room. When they reunited for group schedules, there was no dramatic acknowledgement, no private conversation to clear the air. There didn't need to be. The understanding had already settled between them, steady and unspoken. They worked the way they always had, but with a difference only they could feel. Less hesitation, less checking the room before speaking. Not reckless, just grounded. During one interview months later, a host casually mentioned how comfortable they seemed lately. The comment was light, almost forgettable, but Taehyung remembered it afterward. Comfortable, not careful, not controlled. That night, he brought it up as they walked back from rehearsal. Do you think people notice when we stop overthinking? Jungkook laughed softly. I think they notice when we finally breathe. The industry adjusted the way it always did. Slowly, pragmatically. Opportunities returned, reshaped but intact. New projects formed with clearer boundaries, not imposed but negotiated. The tension that once hovered over every joint appearance loosened. Not because the questions were answered, because the panic around them had faded. Fans, too, seemed to shift. Discussions grew calmer, less urgent. Some moved on entirely. Others stayed quieter but steady. Support no longer felt like a demand for clarity. It felt like presence. One evening, long after the peak of it all, they found themselves watching an old clip from that broadcast. Neither of them remembered pressing play. Taehyung watched his past self on the screen, the moment before answering, the slight hesitation. I look terrified, he said. Jungkook shook his head. You look real. Taehyung considered that. I don't think I'd change it. Me neither, Jungkook replied, even knowing everything that came after. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that no longer felt heavy. What do you think people took from that moment? Taehyung asked. Jungkook thought carefully. I think some people wanted answers, some wanted drama, but most of them, they just wanted to know we were okay. Taehyung smiled. Are we? Jungkook met his gaze. Yeah, I think we are. Outside, the city moved on as it always did. New stories replaced old ones. New questions chased new moments. But that awkward live TV silence remained, preserved in clips and memories, no longer sharp, just part of the history they carried. It hadn't defined them. It had revealed something they'd been learning slowly all along. That they didn't owe the world an explanation for every quiet truth. That not every meaningful moment needed to be clarified. And that sometimes, the most powerful answer wasn't what was said on live television, but how they chose to keep moving afterward. Together, steady, and unafraid to let silence speak when words no longer needed to. And before we end today's story, thank you for staying with us until this final moment. Thank you for listening patiently, not just to the words, but to the silence in between them. Thank you for giving space to a story that wasn't meant to provide easy answers, but honest reflection. In a world that moves fast and demands instant clarity, your willingness to sit with uncertainty means more than you might realize. Stories like this aren't about proving anything. They're about understanding pressure, humanity, and the weight that public figures carry when every moment is watched, paused, replayed, and judged. By watching until the end, you chose empathy over assumption, and that matters. If this story made you think, feel, or see things from a different perspective, then it has already done its job. Not every silence is empty. Not every pause is a mistake. Sometimes they are simply moments where people choose honesty over performance. We truly appreciate every like, every thoughtful comment, and every respectful discussion you share here. Your support allows this channel to keep telling stories with care, balance, and depth, stories that focus not on rumors, but on emotion, context, and human experience. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe so you won't miss future stories like this. And if you think this video might resonate with someone else, sharing it is one of the simplest ways to support our work. Most importantly, thank you for watching with an open mind and a calm heart. Until the next story, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and we'll see you again soon.